Shameless.
I think that got onto camera. I'm going to keep it if it says so shameless. I'm pretty sure. I hope so. Alex is calling
Good.
me
I
so
hope so too.
shameless. There's a record. This will not. This will not
Shameless
reach
Cena.
shameless.
That
Cena.
that's your garbage pail kid name. Your garbage pail kid name is Shameless Cena.
Oh, that's good. I welcome to the show, everyone. This is going to be a fun episode. Well, fun episode. We're talking about serious things. This is a special episode. We have Ibrahim Marquez. I'm just kidding. His name is Abraham Marquez, and Alex arranged this episode to talk about what's been going on in LA, in Southern California more generally, the war on migrants and undocumented people has reached a new peak, it seems. So Alex arranged this interview. We're gonna get talking about it. I'm gonna kick it over to Alex. Alex is gonna be doing most of the hosting. I'm still gonna be here, but I'm really looking forward to this. And thank you, Alex, for making this happen. As always, you're the best friend of the show.
Thank you, Shameless Cena. Yeah, I'll take it over then. Thank you, Abraham Marquez, for being with us today. Abraham and I think we talked some years ago, right? Like we hooked up talking one of the stories that you were working on. I don't remember if it was before or after the pandemic. But you're a freelance journalist based out of Southern California. If you want to talk about yourself, your background, and some of your work.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, actually. My name's Abraham Marquez. I'm a freelance journalist here based in Los Angeles, born and raised in the city of Inglewood. Just to kind of give you a little bit of my background, I've been doing journalism for, I want to say, taking it full on as a freelancer part time since 2020 in the pandemic. I've always had an itch for it. Never really had the time because of work and life and all that to really kind of zone in and focus on the writing part of it. And 2020 allowed me to do that. I was very fortunate to have a job where I can work from home. A lot of my relatives weren't able to do that. So I took it on. And I think what allowed me to kind of really get really into it was because I come from the background of organizing. I've been involved in social movements in LA since 2007, 2008, organizing against the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, immigrant rights, you name it. So having that background, I can recall, you know, organizing demonstrations and being part of those circles, and then going on to the news at night, watching the mainstream media or reading the LA Times, the New York Times, and reading their coverage of it. If it was even there, it'll be watered down. And I was like, man, it's not fair, right? So part of it was to be able to cover social movements in a real contextual way that people can dissect and can really digest, and give the movement and the people a voice. And since then, LA has been really the epicenter of a lot of the immigrant rights struggles. Next year will be the 20-year anniversary of one of the largest demonstrations of immigrant rights on May 1st, 2006, where close to 2 million, about like 1.2 million people showed up to the streets in LA. I think Orange County had close to 100,000, which is very significant if you know Orange County.
Yeah.
Chicago, New York, I mean, it spread across the country. So that kind of lit that fire in me to be able to continue to document our community.
So we invited you on to talk about some of the reporting that you did around the community defense against ICE raids that occurred a couple of weeks ago in the Paramount Compton area. And so it's interesting. I appreciate how you laid out your own background as a social movement participant and organizer, because I think maybe we can think about how the current struggle against ICE raids and these enforced disappearance squads fits within this history that you just laid out. So maybe we can come back to that, because I think that's really important, right? That I didn't realize it was 20 years since the 2006 immigrant rights movement. Man, I'm getting old, but it's been that long. But yeah, but if you can talk about, like, you were on the ground a couple of weeks ago, if you can talk about what happened tell us about Paramount, tell us about this community that suffered an ICE raid a couple of weeks ago, and the community came out and responded in a particular way that made national and international news. And then maybe we can use that as kind of a jumping off point to just talk about what ICE and these state terrorists are doing in Southern California.
Yeah. So, you and I know that things don't just happen overnight, right? There's a dialectics to it. It's a process. So if we can just like zoom out for a little bit.
Yeah.
um, in March, I believe it was like around March, when Trump took office and he started the ICE raids. I think his quota originally was like 1,300 people. Who led the movement was high school students, elementary school students that were 7 days of walking out of school and walking out of class, um, saying that the government shouldn't be abducting their parents. High school students being afraid to go to college because then they have to fill out, financial aid application, FAFSA, and kind of giving the government their information. That kind of inspired, I think, a lot of people to do something, to be active. And then there was the coalition that was created, led by Black Alliance for Peace, Union del Barrio, Centro CSO. Over 60 organizations joined forces into creating a coalition where they can communicate with each other from different parts of LA, where they see ICE vehicles or government vehicles or federal vehicles. They can alert the community to not come out. They started doing patrols in the neighborhood. So prior to that weekend, I believe it was June 6th, what happened in Paramount, I think people were already alert. I think people were already awake. I think people were already angry and frustrated with the system and with the way things were happening. That when the Home Depot in Paramount, when people noticed that there was ICE vehicles parked there next to a factory, and the community came out to prevent them from kidnapping people, it just kind of give people an idea of what Paramount is, right next to Compton, to one of the most oppressed communities in South Central or South LA, predominantly Black and brown community. They all came out, it was on a Saturday. They all came out to prevent these ICE vehicles, and there's where the Home Depot's at. If you go just east on the west, there's the freeway overpass, and that's Compton. So there's people trying to come from Compton marching into Paramount to defend their community. That's when the sheriffs came in and they blocked off everyone from being able to cross there. Me being one of them, I couldn't cross into the Home Depot because they just blocked off. It was CHP, sheriffs. And that's where there was a standoff between the community of Compton and Paramount and the sheriffs. One thing that I will never forget an experience was when I first got there. There was a standoff between the sheriffs and one of the community members, and they had the helicopters flying over, telling people, "Go home, go home, go home. We've recorded you already. We have your face recognition or whatnot." And one guy told the sheriff, was like, "I'm home. This is my hood. I live right down the street." He goes, "You guys aren't from here. Get the fuck out of here. Like, this is not your hood." And I was just like, and it was, it was kind of refreshing to see OGs and the OG gangsters coming out, rocking a keffiyeh, pushing the cops out, defending their neighborhood, and that kind of re-energize the revolutionary optimism that there's potential change here in this country. And once we get organized, things can change. But that day, the sheriffs were just shooting at everyone indiscriminately. I posted all the videos on X, on Threads, on every platform that I possibly could, because you can see them just slowly in their armed vehicles just unloading on people, including myself. I got hit. A few of my journalist colleagues got hit as well. We're suing the sheriffs for that. So that day, I think it showed the world that these these institutions that are supposed to protect and serve the community are upholding the status quo.
No, I'm really glad you talked about. I mean, you anticipated one of my questions about how you situate this effort of community self-defense that happened in June a few months back, right? Because I was going to ask you a question about spontaneity, because that was one of the online, that was part of the discourse, right? That this type of action was like spontaneous, but if you know a little bit about social movements, the history and the practice, et cetera, we know that there's something infra about it, right? There's infra layers of preparation. And I saw a recent reporting on LA Taco, one of the journalistic outfits that you work for, that you collaborate with, where they're riding around with Unión del Barrio, one of these organizations, and they're explicitly making a connection to what the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense did. And I thought that was really interesting, right? So they're making really interesting historical connections for the past, past instances of community self-defense. But then in the moment, like you just mentioned, the OGs rocking the keffiyehs, they're making connections to what's happening in Paramount and Compton to other parts of the world. And it reminded me of this sign that I remember seeing in 2014 during the Ferguson uprising, where people were protesting Ferguson. They were protesting then another genocidal attack on Gaza, and also Ayotzinapa in Mexico. And this young lady had a sign. I can't remember where the protest was. It was like Ayotzinapa, Ferguson, Gaza, mi barrio, tu barrio. So it was like that. For me, that image is already stuck in my mind, because that's like a possibility there, right? Of like a particular form of internationalism that is centered around essentially colonial police brutality, right? And thinking about how do we connect the dots. But before we go in that direction, let's think about so you've talked about the community that came out that day to defend undocumented peoples. And honestly, they're just defending brown people, right? Because they're racially profiling, and they're going to go after anybody brown and say you're undocumented and we're going to take you out, which they have done. ICE has done. But maybe if you can talk a little bit about, there's the actors on the other side, right? There's ICE, which is it's a war on terror police force that gets created after 2001. But then if you want to talk about the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which also has a very particular nefarious history in South LA. I don't know if you have any comments, so we can kind of sketch out like who the villains or the bad guys in this story are.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. LA has a very unique perspective or experience when it comes to, law enforcement or cops or ICE or federal agents and terrorizing our community, because thanks to Cerise Castle's reporting on the Los Angeles sheriffs, that there's gangs within the sheriffs, right? She's exposed their emblems, their titles, their initiating of killing people. I remember when they was it 2020 or 2021 when they killed Andres Grado in Gardena. Was one of the sheriffs, one of the gangs, the deputy gangs along with the sheriffs. Now we're also hearing about bounty hunters getting paid to come into these communities. We have federal agents. What really kind of, I guess, it's not new to LA, right? Like we kind of been knowing this for a while, especially if you live here, that the police are the biggest gangs in the neighborhoods. They racially discriminate into different neighborhoods. I grew up in Inglewood, where you saw a cop, man, you let everyone know. We put everyone on alert. We were kind of more afraid of the cops than gangsters, really, because they have a license to kill. Whether you're political or not, you kind of have that understanding that they're not there to protect you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and also to think about LA, right? There's certain communities in Los Angeles, like not the actual city of LA, but there's certain parts of unincorporated parts of LA where LAPD, the police department, isn't the primary policing occupying force. It's actually the sheriff's department, right? So in Compton, Paramount, East LA, right? They're the primary police force. And like when you talked about, just to stress this for the audience, when you said that there's gangs in like within the sheriff's department, like this isn't hyperbole. Like there's actual gangs within sheriff departments stationed in different parts of broader South LA, where they have their own tattoos, they have their own initiation rights, and they have license to kill. They have license to commit all instances of police brutality, including the intimidation of journalists who are trying to dig into this occurrence, this phenomenon, as like Cerise Castle, right? And I know she's, I think one of the bravest journalists, because the stuff that she has to put up with from sheriff's department on an everyday level is kind of crazy. What about ICE? Like, if you have any thoughts you want to offer about ICE and where it sits within just like a broader American policing infrastructure or structure in terms of what they're doing in LA right now.
Yeah. Well, first I want to give a shout out to all the community members who have been at the forefront of pushing them out their hoods, making it hard for them to stay at a hotel, even forcing some hotels to break contracts with ICE and allowing them to sleep there and stay there. For me, it's wonderful to see so many different hoods organize themselves, be politically active in pushing them out. But as far as the ICE's role within our society, within our community, is to continue to feed the prison industrial complex. Not too far from here, Nadalanto is one of the largest prison ICE detention centers in Adelanto. Multi-billion-dollar company. They donated to Trump's campaign. So part of his campaign, I'm sure part of that deal was for him to try to fill in all those beds.
Yeah, for sure.
For years prior to this, there was rumors and rumors that it was going to close. It was going to close, but they slowly kind of expanded westward and then purchased a new building. So they're not going anywhere, right? And so we understand that. So it's a capitalist money making machine to continue to put poor Black and brown people into prisons, and it just serves the system.
Yeah, and I just saw a report that Stephen Miller apparently owns a bunch of stock in Palantir, which is another one of these tech companies that's involved in surveillance and in detaining of migrants, right? So there's intertwined economic interests, obviously, like these private prison companies like CoreCivic, who are making a lot of promises in terms of how many migrants they can detain and house, and essentially for-profit prisons, right? Which adds like another level of just brutality and just disgustingness, right? If that's even a word, to think about these privately run for-profit prisons that are used to detain migrants. And then while they're in there, they're given work opportunities to make 80 cents a day essentially doing maintenance for the prisons, right? So there are a certain level there. I mean, yeah, I think it's a form of concentration camp, right? And this in concentration camp, I know we tend to think about World War II. We think maybe we can even go back to Spanish-American War, but like someone like Comrade Daniel Nemzer's book talks about, like, concentration camps began when the Spanish conquered and colonized parts of Mexico, right? And they reconcentrated indigenous populations in different communities, right? So this is a long history. Like, it's interesting to think about what's happening in Adelanto and in Southern California and throughout the U.S. with these private detention centers as being part of a long colonial history of imperialist concentration of surplus. I mean, population whose labor they wanted at one point, and now they're just making. I mean, the thing for me that gets me is that they're making profit off of just having someone in a cell, right? They're just their body in a cell is what's generating private profit and capital accumulation for these companies, right? And that's like that level of evil. I have a lot of difficulty with like wrapping my mind around it. No?
Yeah, in 2019, I had the opportunity to go visit Adelanto and talk to some of the people that were seeking asylum, and hearing the conditions that they have to deal with, the food, which I don't even know if you can really call food, watered down, very processed, unhealthy food, and like you said, they do the maintenance for the building itself. I was in contact with a few people during the pandemic. I actually wrote a few stories of some of those people that were detained inside, and I would, talk to them about 2 or 3 times a week. And on the website for Adelanto, they said that they check everyone, they test everyone for COVID every day to make sure everything's good and safe. And talk to the person I was writing about, and they're like, yeah, no, they haven't tested me yet. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah. No, and someone from the cell is like, can't stop coughing. I'm like, yeah, and because they don't care, care, right? But what they put online to kind of keep people at bay, right? Is like, oh, everything's fine, everything's good, because they know getting inside is very hard. Even if you go to Adelanto to protest the conditions that people are dealing with inside, they completely shut down the whole place. And during 2020 as well, some of the people inside were getting brutalized by the guards as a response to the massive uprising against racism. So like you said, there's this long history of colonial of treating people inhumane and terrible for what? What's the crime? Coming here for a better life?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that gets missed out on a lot of the reporting is why are these people here to begin with, right? And it's, if we start digging at that, that's inevitably going to lead us to U.S. empire past and present, and how they're generating the very people who are coming here and then getting brutalized and set in these. I mean, these are essentially domestic Guantanamo Bays, right? I mean, that's the one. And Guantanamo Bay itself has a history, really nefarious history of housing, quote unquote, housing unwanted migrants, right? Haitians, beginning with Haitian refugees and immigrants in the late 80s and early 90s. So let's think about, stepping back then and trying to contextualize what happened in early June in Paramount and Compton. We have essentially masked government thugs who don't identify themselves, who are running around Southern California, particularly LA, and they're kidnapping people at Home Depots. They're kidnapping people at car washes. They're kidnapping people at like school graduations, nannies at parks. I haven't seen reports of people being taken out of churches, but I know Trump signed a thing that allows ICE and Border Patrol to go into churches. How do you understand, how do you situate what happened that day on January 6th in Compton and Paramount, or actually that weekend, within what's been happening in LA for like the last month or so?
Yeah, that Saturday in Paramount really was sparked everything was the day before on Friday. There was reports that actually let me kind of rewind a little bit before
Yeah.
that. About a few weeks before that, Stephen Miller, who unfortunately I went to high school with, went to Santa Monica High School. He's from LA. Different classes, but a lot of his racist speeches from high school is getting recirculated online. His articles and all this, that dude just hates, brown people and black people. So he had met with,
He didn't get bullied enough, man.
oh man,
Your
dude,
classmates failed. I'm
we have
kidding.
our
Sorry. Go ahead.
we have our 20-year reunion this year, and I think he's a few years older than me. So, and I told him, I was
All
like,
right.
man, I hope he shows up because I got a couple
Oh
homies I want
man.
to say what's up, a couple thousand of them. So,
Yeah.
he had met with Homeland Security, with ICE, about pushing the quota of every day from 1,300 to 3,000. Was very
Na-
very
nationally.
nationally, yeah.
Nationally. Okay.
So he's from LA. I think he has an idea where the pockets are at, where our people are at, which kind of makes if you think about it, that Friday before Paramount is where a lot of the sparks started because they were reported at the Santee alleys. If you ever spend time in LA and you go to downtown to the Callejones, it's predominantly all undocumented workers, factories, clothing lines, food. I mean, you name it. It's a very concentrated area of workers, and they raided an apparel store, which was just a showroom, which is smaller than their actual warehouse where people are at. Um, and that's where the president of SEIU was at, and that's where he got it. He was trying to prevent it. Got detained, got beat up by the agents. Had to go to the hospital. He eventually got out. I think his name is David Huerta, the head of SEIU. Um, and the Santiales holds a very special place, I think, to a lot of Angelinos. You can get everything there, and some really good food, agua frescas, you name it. And I think that pissed off a lot of people, and that's where a few hours later they were spotted in Westlake near MacArthur Park at the Home Depot, chasing people down. I have a friend that works at that McDonald's, and the workers at the McDonald's got scared. People in the drive-through at the McDonald's got scared that they even left their car there running because they saw immigration forces, like, they know their own status. Like, yeah, I'm not going to stay here. And they just left, and they had to find someone to come and get the car. So that Friday, it really sparked a movement, because then there was two press conferences held one on each side of the detention center in downtown, where they actually placed uh, where ICE takes their detainees. And that movement kind of continued on to the next day, when wherever I felt like, if wherever there was a report that ICE was at, people were going to go just because they were already pissed off. And so then that led into Saturday in Paramount, which went on till, I mean, I was there from 2 p.m. to close about 9:30, 9:45 p.m. And my colleagues ended up staying there till the rest of the night. And then that led into Sunday as well in downtown LA. So there's a continuing fight of people coming out to push back against these kidnappings, these state-led kidnappings that we don't want to see. These are our community members, these are our relatives, these are our family members, and I feel that there's going to be a moment where we're going to relive 2000 and 2006 sometime this year, where there's going to be millions of people out in the street, because the Karen Bass administration here, the mayor, the governor, they're not doing anything. They're sitting on their hands. And to kind of add to what LA has been dealing with the government, a few months ago, you know, hundreds of people lost their homes in the fires
Yeah.
in Altadena and Palisades. And what did Karen Bass do? Nothing. she launched LA 2.0 with a bunch of real estate gurus, and hasn't even provided relief for most of these people. So you kind of add that layer of that anger, and also the job market not being as strong as it used to be, housing going up every year. Um, you know, you're going to see these kind of intertwined social struggles kind of get into one. And to add on top of the anger of people seeing the genocide in Gaza, LA has been, has for the last 20 months. I mean, for someone who's gone to Palestine protests for close to 15 years, the last 20 months I've seen, one demonstration had over 50,000 people in downtown,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yeah.
and in Paramount, someone wrote on the wall, free Gaza, fuck ICE, making making those connections.
Yeah.
And like you had mentioned earlier about 2014 with Ferguson, it reminded me of that, because I remember 2014, right? I remember the Ferguson uprising and the internationalism, and the Palestinians putting out videos online to tell people in Ferguson, this is how you deal with tear gas.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is how you handle these oppressive forces, and you can fight back. And to see that in Compton, oh man, it was beautiful. And I think more and more people are becoming a little bit more class conscious.
Yeah, that I like that slogan, "Free Gaza, fuck ICE," because it's a revolutionary slogan, but it's also a slogan that reveals the limits of someone like Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, right? Like those are the two things that they can't do.
Mhm.
And someone like Karen Bass is wild, no? If you know like her biography, like she was part of the Venceremos brigades. Like she went to Cuba as a teenager to do like sugar harvesting in the late '60s, early '70s. She's actually like a character out of Keonge Amada Taylor's book on Black Lives Matter, where she talks about black faces and high faces. Like that trajectory, political trajectory that she followed is not that uncommon, right? Of having like
Yeah,
a radical, or and that happens with Chicanos in California as well, like radical machistas in the '70s and '80s, and then they get to California state politics, and we see
yeah,
what they become. No, so, but that I think that slogan kind of hits at the limits of like the liberal, not just liberal, the what liberals deem to be politically possible, but like even like the limits of their political imagination,
hmm
because that's like too much.
hmm
And I always think it's interesting to remind people that like the current head of the current borders are Tom Homan, like he's an Obama appointee. And
yeah,
when it comes to migration and detention and these type of raids, there's different stylistic and rhetorical differences, but it's a bipartisan project since at least the '90s, no, with Clinton. So, but that leads me to another question. Like, if you think about, like, what do you make about? I mean, these are like spectacles of terror, right? That we're witnessing. Like, I think Democrats, especially under Obama, when famously referred to as a deporter in chief,
hmm
who I still think has deported way more people than Trump. Definitely Trump one and Trump two. Like I feel like Democrats do the same type of. They obviously have a same type of approach to migration, but they want it out of sight, out of mind, right? Whereas for people like Trump and his political base, they want the spectacle of terror. They want Stephen Miller saying LA has fallen. And
yeah,
then after what happened in LA that Sunday, that first weekend of June, you have the deployment of the National Guard and eventually the introduction of US Marines. So if you want to say something about, if you see any sort of like, if you want to talk about the spectacle of terror, what it does politically for, what you think it does politically for someone like Stephen Miller or Trump's base, and then think about like, is LA under like federal militarized occupation?
yeah. I'm glad you brought up the connections and how the Democrats do this, because you know the ICE terror and the deportation machine. It's not something that Trump created on January 20th, right? Like we know this, but the Democrats are like, this is a perfect example of like how the Republicans see or process or deal with immigration, and how the Democrats, right? Like they'll smile at you and just stab you in the back,
Yeah,
right? They do it quietly, so that way, like that that picture that went viral is like, if Kamala Harris would have won, I would have been at brunch. It was like,
yeah,
that is like the the Democrat slogan there. Like, yeah, like you don't want to see it, out of mind, out of sight. Same thing with the issue with the genocide, right?
yeah,
Like this is not the moment to talk about it. It's like, well, no, it actually is, because
yeah.
they might not have another day to live. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is not new to us. This has been happening for decades, and so, and to see how the Republican or how the Trump base is doing that, I think it's all theatrics to rile up his base and to show that he's doing something, that he's following through with his campaign promises, of deporting criminals and whatnot. We know it's all BS. And I'm curious to see, just like you said, I'm curious to see how many, like the actual number is, of how many people he's actually able to detain and actually deport. Because it's going to be, I think the more we look into it, I think it'll probably get even more people pissed off,
Yeah.
to see the reality of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they lie about the numbers as well, right? I mean, I think they demonstrated that in the since they took office in January 20th. But there was that report about Stephen Miller bringing in all the regional ICE heads and like just berating them for an hour or so, saying you guys need to, like, as you mentioned earlier, right, raise your daily detention rate to 3,000. The problem is, and we're starting to see reporting on this as well, is that there's no capacity to detain that many people, and journalists and lawyers have been warning that people are going to start to die in ICE prisons, and it's probably already happened, and we just don't know about it. And this then leads to outrageous. I mean, one of the things that I think about, like, where this is leading us to, is this current proposal in Florida where they want to build a alligator out.
Oh yeah.
Like DeSantis wants to build. Like, this is like, I've said this before on another pod, but like I feel like all these like dystopic 80s and 90s movies that I loved watching as a kid, like current reality has surpassed. Like we're way beyond those, right? Like an alligator Alcatraz, a $500 million ICE prison in the Everglades. And why do they want it there? So they can say that we have alligators in moats around I mean, it's like, I don't know what to do with that.
And just to, sorry to interrupt, but to kind of talk about something you mentioned earlier, it just struck now that like this current like situation is like fully exposing all the liberals, like completely. Because if you're a liberal and you identify as a liberal and you've always pushed that, well, they're here illegally and they got to do things the right way. Why are they going to their immigration hearings?
Yeah.
Were they trying to do things the right way?
Yeah.
Why are they going to graduations, to workplaces? People are working out in the fields, chasing them.
Yeah.
Well, in a few months, we're going to see the cost of food go up very, very high, because they know we're going to be going out. No, Stephen Miller from the West Side going to be going out to the Central Valley.
No.
Pick our fruit, our vegetables and fruit.
United Phone Workers do that like once a year, right? They like have like a day of like, hey, come and work in the fields, and like two people show up and they leave after an hour, right? Because it's too hard.
Yeah, I've spent time there, and that working, just reporting and interviewing farm workers at 4 or 5 a.m. and just walking up and down in the Central Valley. It is not easy. The heat, the humidity, it is, God bless our workers there, but
they're the bravest, man. They're the bravest people in this country.
100%. And so these liberals that are like, oh, well, they got to do. What are you saying now? What's the right way? Where is the right way going to be? Is that going to be on the next election?
Yeah, you're right.
That going to be on the ballot, and it's not.
Yeah.
So they got to kind of have to realize and wake up that you have, you and I both know you got to go to the root causes, the systemic, right? You got to go into your radicalization and understanding that it's a system that's at fault, and we need to change that.
Yeah, we're not even getting the do it the right way. We're not getting the comprehension immigration reform talk, and we're not getting the crying at the cages. Like, we're getting silence, right? Like, for most Democratic politicians, state level and federal level, right? Like, so what does that reveal? It reveals that they more or less agree with the system. They just don't like the style, right? They don't like the approach. They don't like the visuals of it. Because for them, they want that brunch normativity, right? Like, for them, like, a system that's normal for them is predicated on the one hand, like unfettered exploitation of people, of migrant laborers in the service sector, in agriculture, in like tourism. And also in terms of like them being hounded by ICE, by Border Patrol, placed in for-profit detention prisons. Like, that's their normative, that's their brunch, right? Yeah. So it's out of sight, out of mind. And what makes them uncomfortable is having to see it, right? Having to see, and this is one of the things, I'm glad you brought this up, Abraham, because this is one of the things that's been driving me nuts. Like, this whole discourse about illegality, because we know that once you deem someone illegal, you're defining like the boundary of humanity, right? Like, who's human, who's not human, who has rights, who doesn't have rights.
Yeah. Fine.
So these people are deemed illegal aliens, which is a term that really only starts catching on, like takes off in the 1970s. Then you have people who are deemed illegal, who are then trying to follow the law in a variety of ways. They pay taxes, right? For instance, and then they're doing their check-ins at the court system. Well, because ICE don't have the manpower, the capacity to go do raids all over the country, their solution was to work with immigration judges who at these meetings, the immigration judges would throw out those migrants' cases. And as they're walking out, there's ICE agents there who then can take them into detention, thereby increasing or encouraging more illegality by people who have already been deemed illegal and subhuman. I mean, like, that's like, how do you get out of that? And the only way you get out of that conundrum is through more radical critique, through more radical politics, not this stupid canard of like comprehensive immigration reform that like has been used as cover essentially for allowing the operation of a mass deportation regime for the last 2 decades, right? And it's really wild to see ICE agents outside of courts just waiting to snatch up and disappear and snatch up people who are trying to do it the right way, right? Who are following the law, and they're not allowed to do so, which just says that this is all a game. This is all bullshit. This is about something else, right? It has nothing to do with the law. And the point you made about prices going up, right? This is since I live in Arizona, so so I know a little bit about like 2010 and the Show Me Your Papers law that happened here. But this is at the heart of right wing and even like liberal, but also right wing anti-immigrant politics, right? You have the nativists and you have the capitalists, and like at some point there is a coming to head, right? Because the capitalists need this labor, the capitalists need these people. The capitalists need this cheap labor. This labor has been deemed cheap because of the border, because of immigration, this immigration regime that we have in this country. While the nativists want to kick them all out, right? And we've already seen instances of this, right, where these two wings of the right are coming to a head a little bit, right? So I wonder how, if you have any thoughts about how this is going to play out, or have you seen it played out in LA, and what you foresee maybe.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the 2010 SB 1070 bill, because I remember here in LA we organized a few buses. I went out there a few times to march, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you probably know better than I do, but didn't Arizona vote blue the last election? Or close to
2020, yes. I don't think
right?
I don't think the last election yet.
Yeah, but 2020, which was like,
Yeah.
for me, I felt like it was part of that movement that was pushing for rights, pushing for more social justice things, and it comes from the people, right? Here in LA, I mean, they call it it's a Democratic town, progressive, but we have so-called quote unquote progressive candidates who are sitting on their hands doing nothing. Hugo, Karen Bass, we saw Senator Padilla kind of interrupt a press conference, who he's got arrested by the officials there. So it kind of just shows the levels that the Trump administration is willing to go to just continue this immigration, this deportation machine, detaining people. And I think more and more people now are starting to think outside of the two-party system, because the Democrats aren't doing nothing. Like you said earlier, there's no AOC. Where's she at? Right? Like, ICE is in her borough. She's doing nothing. And I think more and more people are kind of starting to see that we have to rely on ourselves to be able to make change. And I think that's what we're seeing now with like these coalitions with Union del Barrio, Centro CSO. People are on alert. People are, on different kind of like group channels to organize themselves and do things before they go to work and after work and during their lunch breaks to get involved. So I think we're going to see a breaking point of people separating from the Democratic Party, because they're nowhere to be found in one of the most brutal times of the immigrant rights movement.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, and that type of mobilization has had an impact, right? I was reading something recently that talked about how ICE has had to change their approach to these raids, where they try to do like lightning raids now, because they don't want to stick around long enough for the rapid response network to do its thing and get people out. So they're trying to do things under 30 minutes. But then this is why in the last week I've seen so many videos of individuals like going up to them and preventing, a car wash manager a nurse. The most egregious story I saw recently was a elderly woman selling tamales outside of a Home Depot who got like brutalized by ICE, and it took a nurse to go and provide service to this woman, medical aid to this
Mhm.
woman, and at the same time protecting her from these ICE thugs who are masked, who are wearing tactical vests, etc. Um, if you want to talk about like what has happened in LA and what LA looks like since that first weekend of June, if you want to talk about like the National Guard
Yeah.
being deployed, if the presence of the Marines, yeah, like what is, and again I go back to my question, like is it LA under occupation?
Oh, for sure. Since June 6th, that Friday, I went out late at night because I don't live too far from the federal building, and yeah, the National Guard was patrolling the building. And then since then, because of what happened that weekend, I drive by there every day. I've even reported from the building for Telesud. The Marines are still occupying and defending the federal building where all the detainees are sent. So they're still out there. I think the city's spending over $100 million on having the military here, the National Guard and the Marines.
The
Uh,
city's paying for that?
yeah, I mean,
LA City?
Kenneth
Jeez.
Mejia has the accountant for the city has had like a pretty good breakdown of how much is costing the city to how much is costing the city because of the ICE rates. So the cleanup, the deployment of overtime for LAPD, housing the National Guard, like it's just so much money being spent for what, to terrorize our community, when we can be using that money to house people, to provide services, to provide a pathway to fucking citizenship, right? None of that has ever been mentioned by any Democrat. We have Karen Bass coming out on social media, repainting the buildings and removing the graffiti before she even go visits a family that is dealing with ICE terrorizing her family. Like that just shows you the priority. And then going online and saying, "Come on, guys, we have the World Cup here next year. Let's get it together." It's
Yeah,
like that's what you're worried about.
yeah,
You're worried about
yeah.
the World Cup and then the Olympics, while you have this young girl crying on the video because her dad's being taken away, and the dad's like holding it in and telling her it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Like I thinking about it, I want to tear up. Like, how do you see that as the mayor of the city? And the first thing you think of, let me go repaint these buildings
Yeah.
so that it
No,
looks.
they. I mean, I just saw like they got like Diego Luna, Andor star, ran past them, right? Like with that speech he gave the other night on one late night show, right, where he said exactly what you just said, right? Like
Yeah.
the way we fix this is, and this is you would think is a liberal position,
Mhm.
legal path to citizenship. That's they're not even like saying amnesty, not even saying any of that. Like provide a path to citizenship because these people are here running the country. Like without them, like there's nothing culturally, socially, economically. Like they're the ones that like run this country. There's no US without this type of, without this community, right? So
And
particularly in a place like Los Angeles.
what I sort of interrupt, but what I'll add to that, I think the reason that why the Democrats, or even for sure the Republicans, don't want a legal pathway or to provide some type of pathway for undocumented workers to become citizens in this country, rightfully so, because they do all the work. I mean, if you come to LA, I'm sure it's the same thing in Arizona. They run this. I mean, they run the economy.
Yeah.
In 2020, they were the essential workers, right?
Yep.
There were the
Yep.
farm workers, service workers, delivery workers, first aid. I mean, you name it. They were doing everything. Meat packing facilities. They were the reasons why we were able to actually go back to what was normal,
Yeah.
to go back to the office, to go back to work, to go back kind of doing things normally because they kept the economy running. But I think the reason why they don't want to, and it's been playing out recently with Trump, is because of how much they're getting paid. So they know if they're undocumented, they can pay them the lowest wages they possibly can because they know the next person's going to come up and take that job.
Yep.
If they have documentation, if they're a citizen, then they have a little bit more leverage in how much they can get paid.
Yep.
And we're seeing that played out with Trump because a few months ago he came out and he goes, "Oh, well, we're gonna be a little bit nicer to those that work in the fields and the housing and leisure hotel services and all that," because who was knocking at his door? The farm owners, right? The grower class.
Yeah.
The owners of the hotels were like, "Hey, no one's coming to work. We're losing money," right? So he kind of had to readjust, or the system kind of adjusting him say, hey, you're messing with our bread and butter here, because they're not going to pay someone who has a documentation minimum wage or even above minimum wage, because they want to maximize as much as they can from that labor power, which is the undocumented power.
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. And I think that academics have shown this like over and over again, right? Like the amount of time that people have spent dispelling like these like myths about migrants, and like it's so frustrating because it feels like it doesn't make a dent. But
Right.
like you're right, like the border regime and this regime of illegality creates segmented labor markets, right? It creates an exploitable, dispensable, cheap source of labor. And yeah, right, you're exactly right. To make them quote unquote legal and to give them certain rights would make them more expensive from a capitalist perspective, right? And then what the border wall does, what militarizing the border does, is that it keeps in that people, right? Like if you look at the long history of migration, mostly, let's say, Mexican labor migration to the US throughout the 20th century, it was seasonal and it was mobile and transnational, right? They would come to work and go back. And once you started militarizing the border in the way that Clinton did it in the 90s, it kept them in, man. It made it too dangerous and too costly to go back home. So they created this population. They
Mm-hmm.
created through their policies a population of 11 to 15 million undocumented people who then are used as the most exploited, disposable form of cheap labor by the capitalists, right? And then, so you would think like, okay, maybe a liberal politician would be like, okay, well, let's say, why don't we imagine a politics? And I think Bernie kind of did this in 2016. Let's imagine a politics where we don't blame the undocumented migrant. We blame the bosses. We blame the capitalists. We blame the people at the top who
Yep.
are telling us that we should hate the most vulnerable, the most exploited, the most precarious people in this country, right? It's not that complicated, but I think you're right? Like there's obviously capitalist interests at play in preventing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the border. I mean, if anyone that's ever visited, I'm sure. I don't know how it is in Arizona, but here, every president since Clinton has left an indent in the border. You still see the fence that Clinton approved, and then you see like 5 feet away from it another fence that was a bigger, more militarized one from the Bush era. And then because of Obama's deportation machine, he created a large population of unhoused people who were just deported there. And at the later part of his term, I went there. It was like this little riverbed called El Bordo, and I just started talking to people, and some people didn't even speak Spanish. They're from Dakotas, from the Midwest, from Northern Cal, and they're like, "Yeah, I was born in Mexico," and I was like, "But I've been here since I was 2. Like I've been in the U.S. since I was 2." They were working at a construction site that got raided, and now they have to start a new life in a place they have no idea. They don't know anyone, and now they're living in the streets. And it's the community that comes out, the churches, community groups that come out and provide food and all that for them. And I'm sure probably more than I do, but Tijuana is not a very well funded part of Mexico overall. Hopefully in the future it gets better to provide the kind of services, and I think we're seeing Claudia kind of provide some kind of return home type of programs that I've seen online where they allow them to apply for social benefits and whatnot. But like you said, man, the U.S. created these conditions,
Yeah.
and we're just living through it.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, that's another, you bring up Mexico. That's the other part of this discussion that gets left out. And it makes it, sometimes it's left out for political reasons because of who's in power in Mexico and who's been in power in Mexico since 2018. But like this whole, like this a bipartisan approach to migration enforcement, border policy, detention in the US doesn't work without the collaboration of Mexico. And
Yeah.
we know that, right? Like we know that in the last, let's say, 6-7 years that we've had Mexico itself became the wall with the militarized checkpoints that its newly formed National Guard is manning, a quasi-military unit that was ostensibly created to fight the narcos is actually being used for migration detention from people coming from the Caribbean or Central America or South America, right? So that's always like the untold part of this story, right? Like the Americans tend to think about migrants showing up, they materialize out of thin air once they get to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we stretch out our analytical perspective in terms of geography and in terms of politics and history, then we have to, take U.S. empire into account, and we also have to take into account the certain countries that are collaborating with U.S. Anti-migrant policies.
And I'd say migration has completely changed, like I guess, like the details of who's migrating to the U.S. and the undocumented uh, uh, pool of people here
Yeah.
is has completely changed since the 90s. I did a story in early end of last year that was published the day of the election, where I spent months talking to day laborers,
Hmm.
the National Day Laborers Network organization, and they brought up something interesting because the guy's he's been doing this for decades, and he was like, before, the majority of the people that I worked with that were day laborers at a Home Depot or whatever parking lots or whatnot were either were Mexicanos. He goes, now I got Venezuelans, I got Haitians, I got Colombians, I got a variety of people. So even Spanish is like they have to learn and navigate because it's completely different. And you see that also at the border in Tijuana. My cousin kind of gave me this idea that Tijuana is like the world's waiting room because there's a strong Haitian population.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's a Middle East population. There's a Colombia population. There's a Central America. So it's like a big pool of people that are, and if you kind of zoom out a little bit more, why are they there,
Yeah.
right? Who's interfering in their homeland country? It's the
Yeah.
U.S. As we're seeing that the empire become a lot more brutal, a lot more aggressive. What does that do? It forces people to leave to survive.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think people in the U.S. kind of see like undocumented workers or immigration as like just one umbrella, one people, but it's no, there's a whole section of different people from different places that have a common underground, which is U.S. imperialism.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, you can kind of track what U.S. empire is doing by who's coming,
Yeah,
right? And I think one of the slogans that like immigrant activists in Great Britain used in the I think 70s and 80s is that we are here because you were there. And I think that's a really like pithy way to think about that, right? And I think you're right. I think that's a great point. We can track what U.S. empire is doing abroad by who's coming to Tijuana as the world's waiting room.
yeah,
But then the way that then that gets consumed and like understood by a large part of our political class is to say, well, those are threats. And we're going to have Iranian sleeper cells, which is the newest one, right? Are going to sneak in. But like we've heard this for a long time, right? Like
yeah,
and
yeah,
this is like, first it was like Native Americans, then it was Chinese, then it was Mexican revolutionaries. Then it like, there's always like a figure of fear that the U.S. political class uses to kind of mobilize their anti-migrant politics, right? But the one right now that I've been watching because of current, again, because we can track what U.S. empire is doing, is this idea that Iranian sleeper cells are going to be came into the U.S. probably through Mexico, and they're going to be activated soon, no? And so yeah, I think that's a really interesting point.
yeah, yeah.
Um, thinking about like how do you from on the ground reporting in a place like Paramount, Compton, witnessing police brutality, witnessing with what I mean, I don't know, man. I teach Cold War Latin American history, and I'm getting closer to calling ICE just like death squads, like in terms of they might not be doing like direct deaths, but they're doing what death squads did in Latin America, which is snatching people up and disappearing them.
Hmm.
Like, how do you understand like what you witnessed on the ground? Like, how do you connect that to broader like global developments? Like thinking about U.S. empire. Like, is there? We already talked about free Gaza, fuck ICE, but is there another way you can kind of connect what you're witnessing locally on the ground in LA with broader global developments?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Something I've been thinking about, and what I keep like the scene that just keeps replaying in my head is that moment of because even the LAPD helicopters here when they fly over is just telling people to go home, just like ignore what you're seeing, go to
Yeah.
brunch. And I feel like we're getting the same thing with when it comes to the U.S. bombing Iran and funding the genocide is kind of like just ignore it. Go watch your favorite sport and look at this movie. Shohei Otani's pitching now. Go watch a game and kind of just like ignore the reality that people are dealing with, so that the empire can keep doing what it's doing, and that's to expand by force and by aggression. And you kind of, if you see what the U.S. is doing, no other country in the world can bomb another sovereign country and say that we're doing it for peace. Like that doesn't make any sense at all. And they did the same thing in Libya, right? It was a humanitarian bombing campaign to liberate Libya. And what did it do to Libya? It brought back open slave markets
Yeah.
in one of the most developed and high life expectancy in all of Africa.
And now, thanks to the Supreme Court, the U.S. can send migrants to Libya, regardless of whether they're from Libya, right? That just happened a couple days ago. Sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted.
I
Go ahead.
saw that. No, I saw that. I was. It just. It's. It's mind-boggling to see that, and then see people who are into politics and just ignore that, and just like, oh, it's because of Trump. It's like, no, it's not. And I think in LA specifically, ICE is not going to go anywhere. And we're 5 months into his election, into his candidate, into his term, his second term. They're not going to go anywhere. If anything, they're going to get more funding. They're probably going to get, send more people out here because of this, the community is coming out and pushing back. And I think it's gonna, like I said earlier, there's gonna be a boiling point where millions of people are gonna come out who are documented and are gonna sacrifice themselves because there's more of us than there's of them, and pushing them back and kicking them out of the damn city. And I think we're kind of seeing that kind of come into fruition in different pockets. It's just going to take one moment where all the neighborhoods get together and get ready to push everyone out. And we're going to see how Karen Bass responds to it, because again, hey guys, we have the World Cup here next year. She's worried about that than she is about the people in the city.
You imagine if Iran they play their World Cup games in LA, like because Iran qualified for the World Cup. I just been thinking about this, like
I saw them play here. I was a kid. It had to be like in the mid '90s where they played at the I think at the Coliseum, because my cousin, who's half Iranian and half Mexican, who lives in Tijuana, he came up and we went to the game. And yeah, I mean, that would be, when me and a few friends, because I'm sure you saw the World Cup, the last one of the most common things that I saw that was very beautiful was people going to the games with the Palestinian flag and interrupting the broadcaster. So it's like, we got to keep the tradition going and go to the. I can have a ticket to the game, but I'll be at that stadium.
Yeah, no. I mean, I have a really unhealthy relationship with soccer, as in I'm like way too obsessed with it, always have been. But one of my favorite videos from that World Cup was that British guy who's dressed in like King George Crusader attire saying "Free Palestine" in Arabic, which is like, it's, oh god, that video was so good. Yeah, no, it's yeah. I think that, going back to more serious things, I think the idea of, like, from Aimé Césaire, right, Discourse on Colonialism, about the colonial boomerang, it's doing its elliptical travels and coming back, and one like material piece of evidence that I saw that weekend, that first weekend in June in LA, is the use of drones, right? Like, they're using pretty advanced drones to surveil popular protests and these social movements that came out against ICE. And just thinking about this broader, it's kind of it's a discourse that kind of, I feel like it's very online, and it's restricted to certain groups of people about like whether fascism existed in the US or not. And like, my point has been like, it's always been here. And one vector it's been in is like border. It used to be called the frontier, where you just exterminated indigenous peoples, and then they became the border and you exterminated migrants. And if fascism, however we define it, was ever going to come from a place, it was going to come from the border, like broadly defined, right? That history, that space, the type of violence that was exercised there against people deemed to be enemies of the United States. And that's one of the things I kept thinking about, man. That weekend, watching what was happening in LA, and I'm like glued to my phone, following your reporting and following other journalists. Like, this is the boomerang coming home, right? Like, they're undercutting that in Palestine, right? That's why I like calling it the Palestine-Mexico border, broadly defined, because it's like the two things that are giving power to the U.S. state to take away the few rights that we have left, and to go after precarious, vulnerable populations.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the topic of fascism, because that is like a very I don't know, like a hot topic online discourse. And when you see some stuff like this, people are like, oh, this is fascism, this is fascism. And I think in LA, or at least just in general, when people think of fascism, they think of Hitler, right? They think of World War II. But to kind of unpack that, Hitler he didn't overthrow the government in Germany, right? He was elected, and who helped finance him? And we can kind of see the same similarities here. Ford Company, right? The Bush family. And we're seeing who are these companies that we use every single day that are financing and funding the the genocide in Gaza, right? That are also part of the war machine here with with the immigration machine here that are financing and funding these. So we can kind of see those parallels that, like you said, it's who, the U.S. has kind of always been a fascist government towards the indigenous population
Yeah.
from the existence of that it started here. So there are those parallels, and uh, if anyone thinks that the U.S. government is like this democratic dream and for the people, it's not. It's always had a fascistic element to it, but we're seeing it more and more now because of Trump and his cabinet and his policies.
Do you? I'll let you go in a bit. I've kept you almost for an hour, but do you see? So I've been seeing a lot in the last couple of weeks. A lot of like a lot of like prominent media Trump supporters saying, "Oh, we didn't think he was going to do this to like all migrants. We thought that he was only going after the criminals and the dangerous people." Like I saw like a clip from like Joe Rogan. Like, do you see anything like any potential in like, is that a potential divide, or this is just people reacting to what they see online and they're kind of shocked by it, but it won't lead to any sort of political change on the right? Because I've seen numerous like local reporting, right? A landscape company owner in Key West, Florida, talking about they came and took my 6 guys, but I didn't think they were going to come take my guys. They were supposed to take the other guys. I mean, like, do you see any like potential there, or is it just this is just the shock of it that's
It's
forcing people to react?
like that lady who, the Gusano in Florida, who had a concert for Latinos for Trump, and then she came out crying because they took her family. Like, yeah, I think it just kind of digs deeper into like the ignorance of the right of like they don't realize how this is going to affect them too. It's uh, yeah. I think it just kind of further exposes the idiots, like how idiot they are. The right wing
Yeah,
are. Like, they don't really think deep of situations like this and how this affects like their lives. Like, who do you think harvests the food that they eat every day,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
who makes the clothes, who washes the dish? Like, they don't think deep into that because they have like this idea that like, oh, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to hurt me. It's not going to be until they come knocking on your door and you're like, oh shit,
yeah.
what? Why me? It's like you're on the list.
The number of stories I've seen like that, right? Like, yes, that nice salsa song about voting for Trump, man. I mean, that's yeah. I just look and smile. I'm not gonna say anything,
It's just like,
but I think it's at bottom. Like, and I think this is one thing maybe I should be pushing, but those of us who have like a small media platform should be pushing is that maybe like this is like a project of ethnic cleansing, right? And like
mhm.
I think that's a huge component to this whole effort to just to kick people out of this country, right? Especially if you listen to Stephen Miller, if you listen to people like him in positions of power, like their historical referent is the 1920s, is the National Origin Act, it's 4 or 5 decades of white supremacist eugenicist approach to migration restriction, and you add some, you add anti-gay politics into it, and you add anti-communist politics into it with the onset of the Cold War. Um, and for them, like 1965 is like the worst thing that like could have happened to this country, right? So like, I think we need to take that seriously into consideration too, right? Like, that this is like especially like listening to Stephen Miller. I mean, he was going crazy that weekend that you were reporting on the ground. Like stuff he was posting was like Nazi shit, right? Because he again, like he sees the 1920s. That's his historical reference. The National Origins Act, I think, is his historical reference.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you brought up 1965 because that's kind of like the whole Trump, I think, agenda is to go back to a time where the U.S. can do whatever the hell it wants, unfettered racism, discrimination, and you're seeing that with the slash of like DEI and all these like progressive policies, the cutting of education. If you dig deep into it, you're seeing that he's trying to get back into this, make America great, which is going back to being allowed to do whatever the hell they do, or being allowed to do whatever they want when it comes to politically, economically, and putting people down. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and this is a form of ethnic cleansing. It's getting rid of people who make the city, right? Culturally, economically, historically. I mean, it's without the undocumented population here. I mean, this city wouldn't run. You're not going to see Stephen Miller washing dishes downtown.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think no. I mean, we should. I mean, if there was any justice in the world, we would
Right?
make Stephen Miller go pick strawberries and for the rest of his life. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's something I'm going to think about now. Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the ethnic cleansing. And then, Trump has been talking a lot about like the Gilded Age, and that's also an era of like unfettered capitalist rule, right? It's that combination of ethnic cleansing, class warfare, unfettered capitalist control, no social welfare state whatsoever.
Mhm.
And he talks about McKinley, and McKinley as like the first Trump administration, he talked about Andrew Jackson. Now he's talking about McKinley. Um, McKinley ends in a certain way that I'm not going to say because I don't want to get in trouble, but his certain Polish anarchists had something to do with McKinley's fate. But McKinley's also the Spanish American War guy, right? Who God told him to go take the Philippines, and that's why he took and tried to occupy the Philippines, right? So, but yeah, I've been just thinking about that. That this is we just need to say this is a project of ethnic cleansing, and LA, because LA is LA, because of
Mhm.
its communities, its history, its demographics, it's ground zero. And also, I think I hadn't thought about it before until you mentioned it, Abraham, the personal connection with Stephen Miller, and it is kind of nuts how LA in the 1990s did produce an inordinate amount of crazy white supremacist right wingers like Stephen Miller. Like he's not the only one, right? So yeah, man, it's dire, it's bleak.
Yeah, it's and then you add the layer of like the west side where he's from is very strong Zionist headquarters, as we call it here in LA. It's the Zionist headquarters. Even though that after the operation on October 7th, the west side was filled with Palestinian flags. There's thousands and thousands of people in front of the Zionist consulate, and then when they had their march, I don't know why they decided to hire a drone to capture the Zionist march along the beach because it's like 20 people. I was like,
Uh,
why did you get a
I
drone
have
to do
some. I think we have some thoughts of why they use a drone, but we don't have to.
No, no, I'm saying like because
Yeah.
it just like
Oh,
show how
oh yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like
Okay,
like why did you do that? Like why you just showing that you don't have the numbers here, right? But you have
right,
the
totally,
pockets of all these politicians through the
yep.
APAC. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Stephen Miller and his whole lobby and his whole crew is it's they're terrorists, man.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you brought that up. Um, LA being a front line of migrant rights, migrant defense, community defense, but also like Palestinian rights, right? Like now that you think, what happened at UCLA,
Hmm.
what happened in terms of like the huge outpouring of support. I think one of my favorite videos from any Palestine protest march was like the lowrider. I think that was LA, right? The lowrider that has like just the kafia, the Palestinian flag. I think
Yeah,
Yahya Sinwar was on it somewhere painted, right? Like I think that was your video.
yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was your video. Yeah,
at
yeah.
Persian Square, and I was like, dude, this shit is dope, and I posted it. And I didn't realize until later because I was just documenting. I went online. I was like, God damn, that shit it has some legs on it. People were sharing it, and because you see the connection, you
Yeah,
see the
yeah.
connections of the struggle of the migrant workers, of the Mexicans, of being racially profiled, and make it into the larger picture of how Palestinians are being treated in occupied Palestine, and
Yeah.
also the thanks to a lot of reporters of making the connections that a lot of the companies who built those walls in Palestine are the same companies that are militarizing the border here along Mexico. So,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that, like you said, you always have to make the connections between the two.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that video, Abraham, like made me go viral because it was during that moment where people were like, if Hamas came to my house, and I think I said something like, when Hamas comes to my house, and I posted your video, and it made it into Quds News Network. So your video. So I, I,
Nice.
I was I was spreading your message, but that was a really great video. Do you have any final thoughts? Any final comments about about your reporting on the ground, what you plan on continue to do to monitor and to follow what ICE is doing, and also to keep chronicling these really, like, I think, heroic instances of community self defense.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, is to continue to report when I can on the streets. Yesterday, there was a press conference in front of the LAPD building in downtown because there was videos early in the morning that LAPD was blocking, were protecting the ICE agents. I
Yeah,
think they were down on
yeah,
7th and Spring. They were kidnapping people, kidnapping people, too, throwing them
yeah,
on the
yeah.
ground.
Yep.
And as the community was coming out to try to defend these people, LAPD put a,
Yep.
they set a barrier to defend them. And then they also hit the fashion district as well. So yesterday there was a big uproar onto demanding that the mayor and LAPD do not collaborate with ICE. So for me personally, I'm gonna try to continue to report on what's going on the ground, to meet with people, interview them, and show the world that this is Trump's America, and the Democrats are not doing anything. We're in a democratically run city, democratically run state, and they're not providing any kind of safety net, pathway to citizenships.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything, and it's the people themselves who are coming out to defend their community, to defend their neighborhoods, and to put pressure onto the government to do something, because there's no talks of any kind of immigration reform, like a tangible bill to be able to provide our workers something so they can have some kind of safety net to live here and to work here and to provide for their families. So we're up against a big monster, so we got to slowly chip away at it.
Cool, man. No, that's great. And I think you provided us with the maybe the title of the episode, but also the slogan of the episode, which is "Fuck ICE, Free Gaza." But before you go, please let our audience know where they can follow your work, access your videos, which are amazing. Yeah, let us know where we can access your work.
Thanks. On Instagram it's Abe, ABE. My last name Marquez, Marquez 02. And then on Twitter is Abe, same thing, ABE Marquez and number 3. So the two that I normally try to post on.
Cool. We'll make Shameless Cena work and put those in the show notes, hopefully. Thanks, Abe. I know. Cena. He made an appearance in.
I've been here all the time. You guys were vibing so well. I was like, I'll let them go. I'm not helping. I was gonna distract you guys with like Marxist bullshit. Like I was just thinking about the Industrial Reserve Army, Labor Reserve Army, something. I was like thinking about that. Like, wow, why do we stop talking about that? What happened? Well, we talk like liberals now. We say precariat or some dumb shit. Why? Let's bring back Industrial Reserve Army.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good to me, man.
That was my contribution. That's why I didn't contribute. Thank you, Abraham. That was really good. I was here. I was listening the whole time. It was really good. I said in the chat, Strawberry Fields Forever should be playing while Stephen Miller is harvesting strawberries, except it's like some Mexican trance remix with like a lot of trumpets.
Oh, I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. Or it'll be the beeper. Have you heard the beeper song, Cena? The Mexican beeper song? Oh, that's what I want playing.
Sabroso. Sabroso. Ay. Ay, qué rico. ¿Qué dijeron? Ya se acabó, ¿verdad? 1, 2, 3, 4. Pues no, esto sigue.
Oh, that's what I want playing. He has to work at that pace. I'll send it to you later. It's kind of an insane song.
If you're ever in LA, Cena or Alex, if you guys ever in LA, I'll take you down to Tijuana and there's a winery that's owned by an Iranian. So,
oh my God! Wait, on the American side or the Mexican side?
Sure.
The Mexican side I can go to. The American side I can't.
Oh, then I'll meet you in Tijuana.
I'll just meet you there. Thank you, guys. I'm gonna press end record. Thank you so much.